up anyhow. Welcome to our class today. We've got an interview with Colonel Jack Mohr. My name's Paul Johnson. We're going to bring up some things for you that perhaps you've not even thought about before. We're also going to get into more detail on some of the things pertaining to the Israel identity philosophy that could really enlighten you on some points, and we're going to just be firing a whole bunch of questions at Colonel Mohr, and I hope you appreciate it. The first thing, Jack, is there are people who don't even know what we're talking about the subject of Israel identity. These are people who are not in any way religious at all, or perhaps are professing Christians and yet have never heard of Israel identity. Can you give just a simple explanation as to what do we mean by Israel identity in the first place?
Well, Paul, there has been in the news in recent months, of course, a great deal of talk about identity in the newspapers, and almost always the slanted news media has given an idea that if anybody believes in identity, particularly if you're an identity patriot, then you must be a member of the lunatic fringe or an extremist. Certainly you're a danger to decent Americans, and you're a danger to the welfare of the country. And this is, of course, a completely erroneous idea. The idea of identity, as it is called, has been around for a long time. It's nothing new. And it has been taught for many, many years, and many of the great men of the Anglo-Saxon race have believed in this for many, many years. It is a belief that the Anglo-Saxon, Scandinavian, Germanic, and related peoples, normally from the countries that we call Christendom, are the descendants of Abraham, and from the 10 lost tribes that were talked about in the Bible that were taken into Assyrian captivity and disappeared into the wastelands of Assyria, and then up into Asia Minor, and finally on up into Europe. And it is an interesting thing to note that most of the Bible scholars today in the denominational churches completely refuse to accept any evidence that this is true. I think probably one of the main reasons for this is that they have been teaching in their churches for many years that the people that we call Jews today are the chosen people of the Bible, and that you talk to most ministers and they will say that the Jews are the only people of Israel that are left, that the 10 tribes have disappeared and that there's no way of tracing them. Yet there are many, many clues. In fact, within the Bible itself, there are over 200 separate clues that identify the Israel people, and that they are so very clear that it's almost difficult to mistake them in any way at all. The interesting thing is that not a single one of these scriptural clues apply to the people that we today call the Jewish people. And as a result of that, there's been a tremendous amount of confusion in our Christian churches. Most of our Christian churches today equate the use of the word Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew as all meaning the same thing, and they do not have that meaning. In fact, in the Old Testament, for instance, the word Israel and the word Judah, or the two houses of Israel, called the house of Judah and the house of Israel, were two distinct and separate groups of people from the time when the Israelite kingdom split up on the death of King Solomon, and when his son took over, and because of unjust taxation there was a split in the kingdom, and the 10 northern tribes went split off from the tribe of Judah and became known as the house of Israel. And from that period of time on, there had never been one and the same people. And yet most of the religious people try to equate the Jews as being tied in with this group of people that we knew in the Old Testament.
Well, I know I've run into quite a few people who, when you explain some of this to them, they'll still come back and they'll say, well, yes, but the Jews are the tribe of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
They acknowledge that maybe the other 11 tribes have disappeared somewhere, but they're absolutely positive that the Jews are connected with the tribe of Judah.
Well, I think this is one of the problems of that has been some mistranslations in the Bible. I know that particularly the King James people are going to get terribly upset when I say this, because there are many people that believe that the King James Version as we have it today are absolutely word for word the way it was in the original, and this is not so. The essential meanings of the Scripture haven't changed, but there have been many changes that have been made in wording that have changed the shading of meanings, and the use of the word Jew, for instance, is one example of that. If you go to the 1611 translation of the King James Version, which was the first translation of the King James Version, you will find that the word Jew was not used. And it was a very simple reason for it. The word was not known in the English language at that time.
In 1611, the word Jew wasn't in the Bible?
No, it was not in the Bible. In the King James Version, the word Iwi, I-E-W-E, was used, or I-O-U-D-E-A-N, Iudean. And it simply meant an inhabitant of Judea. It had no religious connotation at all. Today, when we use the term Jew, I think most people immediately think of a person that is a follower of Moses and the teachings of Moses in the Old Testament. And yet, Jesus, when he was here on earth almost 2,000 years ago, repudiated that, because when the Pharisees, the leaders of the Jewish people, came to Jesus and said, we believe in Moses, Jesus said, well, no, you don't, because if you'd have believed in Moses, you'd have believed in me because he wrote about me.
Okay.
So the Jewish religion, as we know it today, is I hesitate to use the word, but it's a bastard religion, really, because it's a religion that came out of Babylon, out of the captivity in Babylon, where many aspects of the occult and a thing called Kabbalism, K-A-B-A-L-I-S-M, or K-A-B-B-I-L-I-S-M, which was a mixture of the occult religion of Babylon in the Jewish religion, or in the Hebrew religion at that time, and the two of them are mixed together, and they came out with something that was known as Judaism, which was completely different from the Hebrewism that Moses taught.
What's all this got to do with Babylonian Talmudism? Anything?
Well, the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, is the religious book of the Jews. We many times get the idea that the Jew follows the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. This is not true, because the Talmud supersedes the teachings of Moses in every respect. It says, in the Talmud itself, it says that Jehovah comes to the Talmud for instruction when he runs into a problem that is too difficult for him to handle. And that if he cannot handle it in the council chambers of heaven, he comes to the rabbis on this earth to get information. And the Talmud was written over a long period of time, from about 500 BC until about 500 AD. During that period of time, it took shape. It was known in Jesus' time as the tradition of the elders.
He really condemned that.
Well, this is the thing that he condemned in the Jewish leaders. He said, you've taken the word of God and have superseded it with the traditions of men. And this book is now made into a very, very large volume of 63 volumes. It covers about a 12-foot shelf in the library, and it covers every aspect of Jewish religious and political life.
Seems to me like there's some confusion here. Some people refer to Jew strictly from a racial standpoint. Others refer to Jew as a religion. Black people can be Jews. So Jew is not a racial thing, is it?
Well, for instance, just to give you an example, I got a letter from a lady down in Dallas not very long ago that really was very upset with me because of some of the things that I had said about Zionism. And she said, everybody knows that a Jew is a descendant of Abraham because the Bible says it, and that makes it so. And I wrote back to her and asked her if that includes Sammy Davis Jr. or not. Because here is a man that was a black man that converted to Judaism. Elizabeth Taylor converted to Judaism. and many, many other people that...
I think Marilyn Monroe, too.
Yes, and many, many of them that were not Jews by blood that converted to Judaism, and that made them a Jew. So a Jew, you can't say that a Jew is of a Semitic race. The interesting thing about it is that when you begin to trace back the modern Jew that we know today as a Jew, particularly the one that comes from Eastern Europe, you will find that according to Jewish statistics, and this comes from the Jewish Encyclopedia, it comes from such eminent Jewish writers as Alfred Lilienthal, Arthur Koestler, who wrote a book called The 13th Tribe that was written, the whole book was written on this aspect, that a majority of the Jewish people today, known as the Ashkenazi Jew, have no connections with Abraham or the land of Palestine at all, but they are Turco-Mongolian in background. They come from the steppes of Eastern Russia, where they were converted to Judaism in about 800 A.D. And from that period of time, they have been known as Jews, and yet they have none of the blood of Abraham flowing in their veins at all.
Or are you trying to say that none of the Jews are connected with the Bible?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that a very small percentage of them, and I think probably that these people primarily would be found among what is known as the Sephardim, which is the Mediterranean Jew, that would have any of the Jewish blood that could be traced back to Abraham. I doubt very much, very sincerely, that any Jew living today could accurately trace his ancestry back to Abraham because of the fact that most of the Jewish records were lost when Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 A.D. Most of them were burned up. I doubt very much that they could trace them back any more than maybe you and I could trace ourselves back to one of the invaders that came over from Europe into Britain, you see, 500 or 600 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well then, you're saying that the Jews that we know today are not God's chosen people.
Well, I'm saying that they're not the Jews of the Old Testament. They're not the ones that we call Jews in the Old Testament.
And then the people that came over here that are referred to as Europeans were really the Israelites. Mm-hmm. So we are the chosen people.
Well, we are the people, and I think here we have to be very careful in our term, the use of chosen people. Immediately when you talk about chosen people, you talk about people, or you think, I think most people do, here is somebody that God has given special privileges to, and they're going to be able to lord it over the rest of the people, and they're going to become a sort of a dictator type of a race. It was sort of like the racial supremacy maybe that was taught by Adolf Hitler. This sort of thing. This is not the keynote of identity. Unfortunately, there are some identity people that teach this, but this is not the keynote of identity. In fact, on my study of this, I find that identity, once you know your identity and can trace it back and realize that you are one of the true Israelites, it increases your responsibility, not only to God, but also to your fellow man, a great deal, because the Israel people were supposed to be a servant people. In other words, Jesus said, before you can rule, you've got to be willing to serve people. And the idea of the Israel people was to carry the message of salvation, the message of one God to all the rest of the world, and that they were to be a blessing to the rest of the world. They were not to, for instance, the Jewish Talmud teaches that in the end time, when the Jew becomes all-powerful and takes over under a one-world Zionist government, that every Jew will have 2,000 goyim slaves. Now, the goyim is merely a Yiddish word that means a non-Jew animal is actually what it stands for. And that when eventually the all-powerful Zionist government takes over, that every Jew will have 2,000 slaves. This is not taught in the Bible. This is not what's taught of the Israel people. The Israel people were to be a people that we were to be a blessing to the rest of the world, not to be a cursing to them.
Well, it even goes back further than that. We did a word study on, God's commandment to Adam. Mm-hmm. Dress and keep and till the garden.
Yes.
You look up those three words, and it basically means to referee and to supervise and to regulate and to keep it under control and to be a servant. And it's something a lot of people in the Israel identity don't like to think about, is being a servant. A lot of times you hear people just raising heck about we sending foreign aid to other countries to help them out. And really, we're supposed to be helping these other countries. More help for them to help themselves, and I don't see anything wrong with that, but for some stupid reason, we seem to be sending almost all of our aid to communist countries. Now, what's going on?
Well, you see, we have received special privileges. There's no doubt about that. For instance, the people of America, there's been no land anywhere on the face of the earth that's been blessed by God Almighty more than the people of America have. And certainly this was truer in our early days when we were living more closely to the laws of God than we're doing at the present time. And since we've gotten away from following the laws of God, our nation has begun to slide and go downhill. We're not the strong nation that we was, let's say, maybe 100 years ago. And it's been because of the fact that we've gotten away from the laws of God. But still, during that period of time, America was never an aggressive nation in the same terms, let's say, that England was with colonization and so on. We had no idea of world empire. In fact, it was the American people that released the Spanish world, or the Spanish colonies in the New World and also in the Philippine Islands from the Spanish idea of a world empire. And we have always been a people that have loved freedom in a special way. These are all signs of the Israel people, or the identity people. And the word identity simply means that we are people that understand that we're Israelites.
No, identity is not a religion then.
Identity is not a religion, and there are many people within identity who could not be classified as Christians.
In other words,
and there are many Christians who could not be classified as identity because they don't understand it, you see.
Okay, are you saying that you could be a Baptist identity and a Methodist identity?
Yes, and there are many of them, surprisingly, within these churches today. The reason they attend the Baptist church or Methodist church is because there are no identity churches anywhere around to attend.
I was going to say, I would think it'd be terribly uncomfortable to know about the Jew and to know about yourself that you're an Israelite, and yet have a preacher getting up talking about the Jews being God's chosen
people. It is
people.
terribly uncomfortable. I happen to attend the Methodist church because that's where my wife goes, and I feel like a husband and wife ought to go to church together. There are no identity churches in my area, and sometimes I get terribly upset with some of the things that the pastor said. He's primarily a good man, I think, but he's been brainwashed just like many others in the seminaries, and as a result of that, now I've never been able to understand why Christians would want to give up a heritage such as the identity of being Israelites and turn it over to a group of people that are completely anti-Christ against everything that they stand for. But they do that. And I've had people say, well, I'm saved and that's all that matters. I'm going to go to heaven. I don't have to worry about that. And yet you can bet your bottom dollar that if somebody came to that same person and said, hey, did you know that a rich uncle of yours died and left you $1 million? And all you got to do to get it is go down to the bank and claim it. And when they'd say, oh, let the $1 million go, I'm saved and I'm going to heaven and that's all that matters. That's how ridiculous it is, you see.
Well, let's get back to this question I asked a little while ago. Now, why is it that our country seems to, you said for the last 100 years we've been slipping, and I've noticed specifically since 1948 we've just been going down and down and down, and yet the preachers, most of them are saying that unless we give more and more aid to the Israelis, God is not going to bless this land. And it seems like ever since we started giving them aid, we've been in more trouble. Now, what's going on?
Well, I get many letters from people like Jimmy Swaggart and Jerry Falwell and people like that, and Jerry continually harps on this idea that if you don't help the Jews, God's going to curse you. And he goes back to that verse of Scripture in Genesis 12:3, I believe it is, where God, speaking to Abraham, said, I will bless them that bless you, and I will curse them that curse you. He wasn't speaking to any descendants of Abraham, if you look at that verse very carefully. This was a promise made to Abraham. And the idea, if you begin to even trace it down and say, well, that went on to Abraham's descendants, Abraham was not a Jew. There were no people called Jews for 1,200 years after the time of Abraham. And any preacher that calls Abraham a Jew or Moses a Jew or David a Jew are being intellectually dishonest.
Well, not only that, but if they want to get picky about it, aren't the Arabs descendants of Abraham? And here we send arms to the Israelis to kill Arabs. No.
That's right. Actually, in most cases, I think that you would find, if you were able to trace the genealogy back, that most of the Arabs have much more of a claim to the land of Palestine by being descendants of Abraham than what the Israelis do.
Oh, yes, if they came from...
There was a very interesting statement in Alfred Lilienthal's book, The Zionist Connection, which is a tremendous book on the Mideast. If you've never read it, you ought to get a hold of a copy of it. And in there he says, I would not be surprised if some of my Gentile readers do not have more of a right to the land of Palestine than Menachem Begin.
Is that right?
And this is a Jew talking now.
Do you think they really know?
Have
they been brainwashed, or...
I think probably the little Jew, and I use that term to indicate the Jew that we would rub shoulders with normally at the corner delicatessen or maybe down at the local clothing store. I don't think that those people know very much about what's going on at the international level. I think the damage is being done by what we sometimes know are called the international Jew. This is the one that handles the finances of the nations. These are the very, very wealthy people, the very powerful people that are involved in government. And they're, in all honesty, and I think we ought to say this, that there are many, many Jews in the United States that are completely against the Zionist expansion in Palestine, and that some of them have gone to the extent to where they have used their entire life fortune and they put their life on the line in saying that what's going on in Palestine is wrong.
Zionism seems to be akin to communism to me.
Well, there's no question about that. I didn't believe this for many years because I was a Baptist evangelist for 18 years, and I taught the old idea that the Jews were God's chosen people, and without knowing any better. That's what I'd been taught in the seminary. And an interesting thing happened. I was lecturing for the John Birch Society for 12 years. I was on their American Opinion Speakers Bureau, and I spoke primarily on communism and on subjects related to communism. And I found that every time when I talked on communism, the media would immediately slap an anti-Semitic label on me. I hadn't said a word about the Jews. I didn't know very much about the international Jewish situation as far as communism was concerned. And it concerned me why they would call me an anti-Semite. In every college when I went to where I would be met by a bunch of radicals, 9 times out of 10 they were Jews or Jewish-led. And I was assaulted at one time at the University of Kansas and had some teeth knocked out and had my jaw broken by 10 young men and young women. Every one of them were Jews. And they all came from wealthy Jewish families. I couldn't understand this. And it drove me to the point to where I began to do some investigation. Lo and behold, to my amazement, I found out that the very idea of communism and the very money that made the communist revolution a success was Jewish money, came through international Zionism, and that every single top leader of the communist revolution was a Zionist Jew, and that the Jewish newspapers in 1918, 1919, 1920 in the United States, papers like the American Hebrew out of New York and the Jewish Journal out of New York City, which are the prestigious Jewish newspapers, bragged about the fact that the ideas of Bolshevism were consonant, that means in line with the finest ideals of Judaism. And when the top Jew in the United States, a man by the name of Rabbi Stephen Wise, back in 1920, was asked about communism, he made this statement: some people call it communism, I say it's Judaism. That's pretty positive, you see. And the thing is that if you go to Jewish writings, don't read the books that they have written for Gentile consumption, but if you go and read the books that the Jews have written for their own people, they admit very openly and very positively and very braggingly that they were the ones that were responsible for communism. And the interesting thing today is we've been fed the idea that the Soviet Union is becoming increasingly anti-Semitic. It's the only nation in the world that has a death penalty for anybody that's anti-Semitic in Russia. It's It's in one of the Russian laws. It was put into effect back in the late 1930s. Oh, people say they've changed since then. Now they're anti-Semitic. And yet, today, right at this time, out of 23 members of the Politburo, that's the top echelon of Russia, 19 of them are Jews. And every single member of the top member of the military and police departments in Russia are all prominent Jews. Class in all of Russia that lives down in the resort areas of the Black Sea, and all of them are Jews. This is something the American people haven't been told.
Are you saying that there's no Jewish persecution in Russia?
Yes, I think there's Jewish persecution in Russia because down through the years, the Zionists have not hesitated to persecute their own people if it would help them. For instance, in the 1948, when the revolution, or when they were fighting against Britain, they deliberately sunk 2 ships of Jewish refugees coming down from Russia. One was in the Black Sea, the other was in the Mediterranean Sea. On one ship, almost 900 Jews were drowned, and the other one, over 500 Jews were drowned, and they blamed the British for sinking the ship.
Yeah, I figured that.
And this gained a tremendous amount of sympathy for the Zionist movement, and then a year and a half or 2 years later, it came out that the Mossad had been the ones that had sunk the ship.
You mentioned something a little while ago, anti-Semitic, and yet I've heard people say that that is totally illogical.
Well, of course it's illogical because very, very few of the Jewish people are Semites.
You can't be, okay, then what we're talking about is anti-Jewish.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's a trigger word that has been used that it's got to the point where it's almost worse than blaspheming God to be anti-Semitic now in our churches.
Yeah.
See.
Well, I know I hear it on television, these talk shows, they're always, if you even hint that you're for the white race or pro-American or American first, it seems like automatically you're anti-Semitic.
Well, yes, you are. Or if you criticize a Jew for any reason whatsoever, you can find a Jew that has committed a heinous crime, and if you say he's a bad guy, you're automatically anti-Semitic.
Yeah. Well, okay, now we've got this situation where we've got the preachers telling all the people that these are God's chosen people and we're supposed to do everything to help them. And what you're saying is just the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen in this country? It looks to me like eventually these two are going to slam right into each other.
Well, it's a situation is developing in America that's a very sad and a very dangerous situation. And many Jewish people realize this. I received a letter from a Jewish man in Toronto, Canada, just a few days before I came on this trip. He's very much upset with what's happening, the attitude in the United States, and the thing that is disturbing him, I think probably more than anything else, is what the Anti-Defamation League of the Jewish B'nai B'rith is doing. He said they are building up in the United States and Canada for us a situation where he said if the Christian people in these two nations ever find out the truth about Zionism, there's going to be a repercussion that's going to make Nazi Germany look like a Sunday school picnic in comparison. And he says if it ever happens, he says people like me who are against Zionism are going to be hurt right along with the Jews that are in favor of it.
Right.
And I think this is true. And many of the Jewish leaders today are very much concerned about this build-up. The newspapers call it anti-Semitism, but what's happening is the same thing that has happened in every country down through history where the Jewish people have come in, unfortunately. They haven't been persecuted because of their religion. They haven't been persecuted because of their Jews. They've been persecuted first because of the crooked business practices that they engaged in, the fact that they would take over the economy of a country. They've been persecuted because they've been traitors to the country that they came in. You can go back in history and see it happen over and over again. And then they've been persecuted because of the immoral practices that they brought in. Right. Now, here's a very interesting study that you can do if you're honest. Now, some of you people that are going to listen to this program are going to get mad about what I've said.
Well, they've shut it off by now anyhow.
But if you were to take a sheet of paper and you were to put down a column, in one column, every single item that you think is destroying America today. You could go down and you could maybe put the liquor trade, you could probably put dope, you could put abortion, prostitution, and so on. And then over in another column, if you would put down the leaders, the main leaders in the United States who are backing this thing, you would find to your amazement that probably 99% of them would be Jewish names over in that column. And there's a verse of scripture that the Apostle Paul used one time. He said, the love of money is the root of all evil. And if you look at everything that's destroying this country today, it's got an economic basis. Behind every evil, and wherever you find the dollar sign, that's where the international Jew will gather.
Right. Well, Jack, I think that just about takes care of that subject, and I sure appreciate it.
Thank you.